Your preparation determines your results. I drafted my 60th fantasy football team yesterday, and it's easily my favorite one yet. Here's why. I started with the 4th overall pick, and it was an easy decision to go with Justin Jefferson after Kupp, Jonathan Taylor, and McCaffrey were off the board. I actually have Jefferson as my #1 receiver ahead of Kupp this year, and you can see right here, he leads all receivers since 2020, the last 2 years, in receiving yards. But here's the crazy part about that. Those years were his first 2 in the NFL. He didn't miss any games either, so he's durable as a rookie or sophomore in the NFL. So he's just now entering his prime, and check this out. The Vikings did not add any threats at the wide receiver position. Definitely no starters. They added Garrett Wilson as a depth piece, a special teamer. They drafted in the 6th round Jalen Naylor, who is, if anything, just trying to make the team. So they are planning to start the same 3 wide receiver sets of Justin Jefferson, Adam Thielen, and KJ Osborne as they did last year. Now here's why this is important. Jefferson earned an elite 30% target share. Only 3 guys hit that mark last year, and 167 targets competing against these guys last year. Now in the 2nd round, my goal was to get Aaron Jones, but he was taken literally 2 picks before me, so he ended up with Mr. Leonard Fournette. And last year, Leonard Fournette was tied with DeAndre Swift for leading the league in targets per game at the running back position. And since 2010, targets per game leaders at the running back position, the following season, they finished 6th on average in fantasy points. Yet Fournette currently goes as the 12th running back off the board, even though he was a top 3 running back his final 11 games last year before getting injured. And more specifically, he averaged 21.3 points. Austin Eckler averaged 21.6, so he was basically virtually tied with Eckler as the 2nd best back in the NFL last year, just behind Jonathan Taylor. Now this next running back surprisingly fell to the 3rd round. Saints running back Alvin Kamara has a possible suspension of 4 to 6 games looming over his head. Now Kamara has finished literally top 8 in fantasy points per game and only one time outside the top 4 in his career all 5 seasons. And he's often taken in the 2nd round, but he fell to me in the 3rd round. So here's my thought process around this. Kamara, as I get him in the 3rd round, is a clear 1st round pick without any suspension risk. And if it's announced that he'll miss 4 games, he's likely a 2nd round pick. I believe that the suspension risk is baked into this price point. So if you see Kamara drop to the 3rd round, draft it. Now I took Brandon Cooks in the 4th round as my 2nd wide receiver, and I took him ahead of guys like Terry McLaurin, Gabriel Davis, even Allen Robinson, Juju Smith-Schuster, DK Metcalf. And I feel good about this because last year Brandon Cooks saw over 2 more targets per game than his career average with Davis Mills. And those 9.6 targets were 25% more than Metcalf saw last year, and now he has a new quarterback, and McLaurin saw last year, and he has a new quarterback. But Cooks also produced on this volume. See for yourself. His 15.4 fantasy points per game last year would have ranked 13th amongst wide receivers. For reference, T. Higgins scored 15.7 points per game last year. Mike Williams scored exactly 15.4, so what Cooks did last year with Mills. But however, these guys go 1 to 3 rounds earlier than Cooks on average. So draft Cooks before your friends do in rounds 4 through 5. And also draft this quarterback if he falls to round 5. Because Lamar Jackson ranked 23rd in touchdown rate last year at just 4.2%. By far the worst of his career. The touchdown rate is the amount of touchdowns you throw per pass attempt. Now, despite having by far a career low, he still finished 7th in fantasy points per game. He improved upon his previous year. And here's the best part. All of his underlying metrics improved. He ended up throwing more last year with the new coaching staff. His efficiency was top 8 in the NFL, an improvement from the previous year, and he moved up 14 spots in the rankings from 28th to 14th in accuracy in 2021. So what this means is Lamar Jackson was much better last year. He was still an elite rusher. He just didn't have the touchdown luck going his way. He has clear QB1 upside, but goes 23 picks after Josh Allen. Now, I took Michael Thomas as my 3rd wide receiver in the 6th round, and he currently goes outside the top 30 and even 35 wide receivers as the 36th wide receiver taken off the board due to his injury. But here's my question to you. Do you think he'll drop much lower than this? It seems like his injury risk is already priced in, and according to DraftShark's injury tool, they're projecting him to miss about 2 to 3 games this year, which is somewhat normal for a wide receiver, and his durability rating is a 5, meaning he could play through minor injuries. If Thomas attends camp in July, he is instantly going to move up 2 to 3 rounds in drafts, so you might as well get him now. Now, this next RB is quickly becoming my favorite mid-round pick. Patrick Mahomes' starting running backs averaged 14.8 points per game in his career. And this number you're seeing right here of 13.7 is the amount of points that DeAndre Swift averaged per game last year. And Swift is currently going as the number 8 overall running back in drafts for this year, 2022. Now, listen closely and open up the ear holes because here's the interesting part. Clyde Edwards-Helaire is drafted as the 26th running back off the board. He's the Chiefs starter. And Kansas City did not make any major investments into their backfield. They gave Ronald Jones $250,000 guaranteed. I mean, he's not even a sure thing to make the roster. And they signed Jerick McKinnon in June to $1 million. These guys were not priorities for them, and they were priorities for nobody. Now, let's take a look at a guy that I drafted, even though I'm not crazy about him. TJ Hawkinson fell an entire round past his ADP. He usually goes at the end of the 7th, and I got him at the end of the 8th. Quite simply, he became too good to pass up. And I have a feeling you're you're going to find this next stat interesting. Last year in 12 games with Jared Goff, Hockenson averaged 29% more fantasy points than his career average. It was 12.9 compared to 9.3. And this includes 25 games where he played with Stafford. He scored more with Goff than he did with Stafford. And when Goff was at quarterback for those 11 games, he targeted Hockenson about 7.5 times per game. Now, fellas, here's another way to look at this. 7.5 targets per game is a 127 target pace for this season. And the only guys who had more than that last year were Mark Andrews and Travis Kelce at 153 and 134 targets. Now, if you're curious where I'm drafting, it's on UnderdogFantasy.com. They have the largest fantasy football contest ever this year. $2 million to first place, $1 million to second place, and hey, we'll take $500K to third. If you want to compete for these prizes and even draft with me, you could use the code SAL in the link in the description, and you'll get your first deposit doubled. So if you put in 25, you get 50. If you put in 50, you get $100 whiskeys when you use the code SAL. Now, through the first 8 rounds, I selected all veterans, but that changed in round 9 when I took Garrett Wilson. And Wilson is one of the best later round wide receivers in my opinion. He was a top 10 pick, and since 2014, top 10 wide receivers have averaged a wide receiver 29, so a top 30 finish at the position. However, Wilson currently goes as the wide receiver 50 in drafts, which is 11 spots at the wide receiver position and 25 overall spots later than rookie Treylon Burks, who went after him in the draft and has not currently reported to any team activities because he has been, quote, unavailable during minicamp. Now, somehow this next wide receiver goes even later than Garrett Wilson. Tyler Boyd goes as the 52nd wide receiver off the board, which is weird because he's literally finished as a top 36 receiver in 3 straight seasons, including last year with Jamar Chase there. So you're drafting him at his floor, but check out his upside. Boyd averaged 17.2 right here fantasy points per game on 9 targets per game in the 2 games that T. Higgins missed last year. Both of those numbers would rank top 10 amongst wide receivers in 2021. But that's not all. Before Joe Burrow got hurt in 2020, Boyd was averaging 16.2 fantasy points per game on 8.7 targets per game. So here's your takeaway. Even if Jamar Chase and T. Higgins stay healthy, Tyler Boyd is clearly being undervalued. But if anything happens to Higgins or Chase, and look, it's the NFL, it's football, it's a contact sport, wide receivers miss time, Boyd becomes an instant top 20 wide receiver. So these were the first 10 picks of this draft, and it's very important to nail on your early round picks. If you want to check out the early round picks that have some red flags, then you need to watch this video right here. And you may be shocked by some of the things I discovered in this bad boy.